My name is Sharon Kellam, and I live in Ashe County, North Carolina. I'm a native of Guilford County, North Carolina, and grew up and have lived in North Carolina pretty much all my life. For a little while I lived in Virginia. I spent some growing up years in the mountains of Virginia. I now live in the mountains of North Carolina in Ashe County. And I grew up in what they called half orphanage. It was a military boarding school, and I was 6 years old and my sister was 3. And so I never had space for storing large items or any kind of items really. And so I collected little pins. My sister to this day even collects little small rocks and little tiny things. I suppose that's why we did that. We didn't have space. So I collected little pins all my life, and at some point I realized they were all in a drawer and I never got to see them. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be nice for me to have like a fisherman's hat? So I created, on my denim hat, I put all these pins. Well, it turns out it was very heavy. It wasn't something I was going to wear, but at least I did get to see them. And I, for 10 years, was a storyteller. I did they called me a mountain artist up here in the mountains, and performed on lots of instruments. Music was a major for me in college, and I always was very, very much in love with music all my life. And so I did a lot of different programs for children, and I put these pins on this hat, and I did something called my Where Who hat. I created a story about who I was and where I came from, and at the end of the program, then I would have them make a paper hat out of newspaper and tell a little something about who they were and where they came from. I created this little book called My Where Who hat, and it has a CD in it, so that I told the stories, and an artist here in Ashe County actually drew the pictures. A lot of the pictures that are here in this little book were drawn. Let's see if I can find one of the pictures. Were drawn by this artist here in Ashe County. The first picture that I have is a little girl with a watering can. And it's on my hat, and he drew a picture of her. Let's see if I can show you the watering can on my hat. This is the little girl right here. I was 4 years old when I got this little girl with a watering can. And I kept it forever. I still have it. It's on my hat now. And I treasured it. The next pin I got on my hat in chronological order, I was 6 years old, or thereabout, 5 or 6. The skates were so heavy on my feet that I was very skinny. I almost couldn't pick up my feet. They were heavy, heavy old metal skates that grew with you. At that time I had saddle Oxfords, and you would put these heavy metal thing on the shoe. It would fit the shoe. And there was a special key, and it would make that skate bigger, wider, or longer. And I wore it around my neck. It had my name on it, so you need to take a look at this skate key, because it has my name. I was so proud of that, and I wore it for years around my neck so that I could adjust the skate to my shoe. The next pin that I got, I was especially proud of. I was about 9 years old then. And at this military boarding school, I was privileged to be able to take piano. And I had a date in the parlor every afternoon for 30 minutes with an upright piano, and I practiced. And in my 4th year of studying, because I started when I was 6, 7, 8, 9. Anyway, I was in book 4. I played the entire book 4 of Michael Aaron, which ended up being about an hour's worth, for a student body of about 350 people in the auditorium, because the school encompassed 2-year-olds all the way through 2 years of college. It was a very big deal for me, and I was dressed up in a real pretty little dress with patent shoes, and I sat and played an entire hour. I don't ever remember being scared, because children just did what you were told to do, and I was told to play for an hour, so I did. And I won this pin, and I was very, very proud of it. It's hard to see this pin on my hat because it's so little. let's see if I can find it. It's a little tiny, tiny pen. It's actually sterling silver, but I don't have it polished up, so it doesn't shine like it should. And I was very proud of that pen. Now, continuing on, and I also used to tell the children, as far as who you are and where you're from, I'm Heinz 57. Some of my people met the boat. Those were the Native Americans, they call them now, instead of Indians. And some of my people got off the boat indentured. That's what you did when you had no money for passage. You were indentured for usually about 7 years to work for someone that paid for your passage to this country. And so some of them got off that way. Some of them had enough money to make the passage all on their own. And some got off as free men, but some got off in chains, because I also have black blood in me from the triracial people that walked the Trail of Tears, that were led out of Georgia, and they dropped off actually in Illinois before the crossing at Cape Girardeau. So it was a very mixed bag. Getting back to my pins on my hat now, the cross guns and the Edwards military pin, there are two pins. And when I was in the marching band, I actually had to don a wool uniform, which was very scratchy when it was hot. But I also was very proud of these pins that I had, and I had to learn to tie a man's tie. I was very proud of being able to do that too. The two pins, let's see, here's a cross gun, one of the cross guns, EMI. And let's see if I can find the other one. Oh, here it is. And then a special little pin that also said EMI on it. And those were pins that you wore on your lapel, I think, as I recall. That's where I wore them, on the military uniform. I rarely saw men and boys other than in uniform. When I attended public school, I was in culture shock. Now, another pin, which is fairly close in age, probably 8, 9, 10 years old would be tops. I used to visit an adopted granddaddy that lived outside of Woolwine, Virginia. And Woolwine, Virginia is not, it's a blinking light, maybe it's a stoplight now, but it was 3 miles out. And it was a 100-acre old self-sufficient farmstead where he and my adopted grandma lived and had lived all their lives. I loved it. I called it my love home. My growing up home was Salemburg, North Carolina. But when we went up there, we were very close to Ferrystone National Park. And in Ferrystone National Park in Virginia, there's a strange rock formation that forms these, what they call fairy stones. The Indians said they were magical. And the Native Americans, we call them now. And there is the fairy stone. There is one of those fairy stones that came out of the rock formation. You can buy them if you go to Ferrystone National Park in Virginia. And Camilla Lewis was like an adopted aunt, and it was Patrick County, Virginia. It was very, very special to me, that fairy stone. The legend was that it was a very magical and protective kind of sign. And so I wore it around my neck a lot. And now it's on my hat. Then I didn't know my father because he died when I was 3 years old. But he was born in 1906 here in North Carolina. And he was in Montgomery County, which is down east, very flat. And in the 20s, in the roaring 20s, in the early 30s, the big thing was to fly one of these little airplanes that had been created. And he and his brothers and sisters, there were 12 of them, all were able to fly these little tiny airplanes. And at that time, there wasn't much traffic in the air, and so you could fly anywhere you wanted to. They used to jump in these little cubs, and they'd fly to the beach and land right on the beach and enjoy the beach for a few hours and then fly home. Or they would come to the mountains. And he had a tremendously accelerated sense of direction, and was usually the one that led the way, would lead several planes would fly. They would go in a group, a club, and he would be the leader. But he didn't have instruments in his airplane like we do today. In fact, the only instrument that he had was this little tiny compass that I have on my hat today that just tells you north, east, south, west. I don't even think he needed that. But he had that, and my mother said he would just slap that up on the dashboard of the airplane. That was the, other than something that showed him whether he had gas or not. I guess it was empty and full, and it would show you how much you had. But other than that, there were no other instruments in these little tiny planes. And so he had this little compass, and he'd just flop it up on the dashboard, and they would fly all over. They would fly all over the state. I think that's very interesting that our lives have become so complicated today, because he had no trouble at all. At that time, they would follow the roads, but they would follow the train tracks often. And most towns had a huge water tank that stored their water. And they would put the name of the town, and you still see that. The city or the town would be written on that tank. And so that was another way that they were able to follow along and see where they were going. And so those are some of my hats, the pins on my hat. One more pin before we leave this storytelling session is a flying pig. Now, the English, the Brits, have a tale about pigs. Pigs are very smart. They're very smart animals. And they feel that pigs can see the wind. There's something magical about pigs. And someone even wrote a song that I used to sing all the time about pigs can see the wind. And so I have this pig, this little pink pig on my hat. Now where in the world is the pink pig? Oh, there it is. It's little tiny pig. And I think it's got wings. I think you can see it's got wings. Okay. So, when pigs fly, is what they used to say, which meant, well, it would just be magical, or it would be something that would be very, very, very special. And I said, Pigs Can See the Wind was written in the 1970s by an Englishman. My father, when he was a little boy, he was one of 8, and he was one of the older ones, but he wasn't the oldest. And a couple of his older brothers said, you know, Charlie, if you go out there and suck that old sow, you can see the wind just like a pig can see the wind. Well, he did, and he didn't. I don't know at what point he realized his brothers had played a trick on him, but he did not see the wind. And so I will be back here again for more stories later.